they are the ones who actually take on some actions that are different from status quo. They have the means, they have the capacity and the interest. Let's talk about pizza and delivery and all that. A lot of innovation has happened in that process.
Well, hello and welcome to The Stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy advisor and investor doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And we are thrilled to be joined by our latest guest as part of this Colorado River Basin special edition for season 6. A big thanks to our sponsor, Raymond James, and our knowledge partners for bringing this to you today. And we are thrilled to be joined by Newsha Ajami, who is the Chief Development Officer for Research, Earth and Environmental Sciences area for Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. There we go. I got it out with no mistakes. Newsha, great to see you, and well, welcome back to The Stream, in fact.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I apologize for a long title.
No, never apologize.
It was a joke.
Yeah, how do you abbreviate that, Newsha? I mean, is it even possible?
I mean, when I was looking for jobs, they said, what are the jobs I can get that are not abbreviatable? So that's how I ended up on this one.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Newsha from Berkeley doesn't do it justice, right? We have to for the intro.
You have to go for the whole. I'm just testing you on that.
There you go. There you go.
Does your card wrap around the front and back then? Is that? Yes,
it's long.
Okay.
And all spelled out.
I love that.
It's anti-culture. Trying to keep things real, right?
Well, in the age of people kind of ditching business cards and QR codes and even normal business cards, I mean, it stands out, right? It folds out, it's multifaceted. There you go.
Fold it.
Yeah.
It's like a scroll. Yeah, I got Newsha's scroll.
Yes. You always remember it. See, that's how you differentiate yourself.
I love it.
I'm going to make a TikTok episode on that.
Well, we will watch it and promote it.
Sounds good.
Absolutely right. Good. All righty. So, Newsha, last time you were on was a couple of seasons ago, I believe, on The Stream. So we're back with a focus on the Colorado River Basin. So thanks for joining us. Obviously, you're leading the way when it comes to kind of research and thought leadership, influencing on decentralized reuse. So it'd be amazing to sort of kickstart, I think, to sort of get your view on where you see that fitting within one of the most highly water stressed areas in the United States. I think in the last episode we sort of spoke with you about your origin story, which was amazing. So we can almost jump straight into the river basin and where you see the role of decentralized reuse.
Yeah, it sounds good. I think I would say I roll in decentralized water solutions under the demand management. And the reason I think about it this way is because it can be developed by individual households or sort of installed by individual households to a neighborhood, to a region, right? And a lot of us, especially in the West, are dependent on centralized water systems, right? So as we embrace these decentralized water solutions, we in a way are reducing our demand on that centralized system that we all depend on. So in a way, decentralized water solutions are sort of part of a very important part of demand management strategy.
Newsha, what's the pushback? You and I have talked about that. We talked about it on The Stream in terms of the installed base, the status quo is centralized systems. We've all gotten used to it. Funding continues to go that direction. How do we sort of break that logjam, if you will, and start bringing in decentralized technologies into the mix in the home and, the built environment at large? And, we're going to have Aaron on and, he's dealing with Epic. So, yeah, what needs to change quickly?
I would say it's very much hinging upon policy and financial incentives. So how do you create an economic sort of landscape that would enable this embracing these solutions? And how do you put together a policy framework that encourages that transition? It's very similar to the energy sector. 30 years ago, we were not seeing a lot of solar panels on people's roofs. Now it's sort of like a commonplace, right? So it's just that a lot of different policies that went into place, for example, renewable energy portfolios and creating these regional goals made people sort of encouraged communities and individuals to take on these solutions, and also the financial incentives, right? A lot of rebates, a lot of incentives for individuals to take these on. I would say one other very big value of decentralized water solutions is that also it sort of breaks apart from one quality for everything, right? Sort of fits quality for purpose, which is right now we don't have in place. So we talk about reducing our climate impacts, the sort of emission levels, and trying to kind of manage the impacts of climate change. Talk about water, right? We treat water to the highest quality, comes to our homes. We use it for all different purposes, not just our homes, our businesses, everything, everywhere that you think. Our system is not fit to treat water to different qualities and send it to those nodes to be used for those purposes. So providing kind of the incentive to rethink how we use water, what quality we use for what purpose, and how can we break this kind of existing model is going to be key.
Do you think that sort of breaking the status quo, as we call it, is culturally the hardest thing? Because this is a case where the private sector is going to probably move ahead of the regulation, right? And we have got a tech entrepreneur who's coming on, sort of pioneering the way in this, where commercial buildings are reusing their grey water for other irrigation purposes. And one funny comment that he said to us was that the seasoned, and I use that word seasoned, experienced utility personnel who were at a conference with him came up to him on the sidelines and said, so you're the guys that are going to put us out of a job, right? As opposed to kind of, well, actually, one way to reframe that might be you're the guys who are going to help reduce the demand and reduce the load on our sort of straining infrastructure that's coping with population growth and the impact of climate change. That would be the kind of the optimistic way, but the go-to was the defensive. You're putting us out of business. Let us do our job. Why are you guys getting involved? And that kind of changing of the status quo is one of the hardest things to transform, right?
Yeah, I think you're touching on something very important, which is water utilities were formed to provide reliable water supplies to people. And a lot of that was dependent on how can we increase supplies to meet future demand, which they assumed is going to be perpetually increasing, right? So this concept of, I think Villa and I talk about this all the time, and I think we both got to it in different ways, but the whole abundance and creating this sense of abundance for people is this misconception that there's enough water, we just need to go find it, right? And then people just use it as they wish, they pay for their bills, and we just move forward, right? The problem is when you're talking about these decentralized solutions, it means that you are moving people away from sort of making them independent of these centralized systems, right? And turning them from a consumer of a good to a producer and a consumer, sort of prosumer, right? And so they are reducing their dependence on that centralized system while, generating their own water. And that means that if you think about it for a second, these are two opposite goals, right? One is assuming that you or forever would be dependent on them, always need resources from them, always would be dependent on what is the next drop of water is going to come from. So when you are in this camp, you need to constantly invest in more water supplies, finding next water, drop of water, building infrastructure to bring it to people, right? So that your investment strategy, your policy strategy is very much sort of relies on that goal. And then on the other side, people are sort of plugging off or partially sort of going off the grid. So the financial model here is not going to work. So that's why somebody would come in and say, you're putting me out of business, because somebody has to pay for all the investments. And who would that be?
Right. I mean, it really is the challenge of the installed base that has no incentive to change.
No,
And
absolutely.
You know, there's a profit model tied to it. There's an ecosystem of service providers, technology providers, and unless they see a economic opportunity, they're going to keep doing what they've always done. And I think that plagues not just the water sector, but historically has plagued energy. Yeah, and I think the energy sector is just a great example of, you know, innovative technologies and entrepreneurs that sort of nibbled at the edges until they got traction, not from the big utilities, but they actually got it from the customers and consumers. So I think there's a similar glide path roadmap here.
I think you, yeah, I totally agree with. I think you raise a really interesting point, Newsha, about the role of people, and I hate it, but not consumers or residents, we're calling people, and actually in playing a part in the future of water, and that's really interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I was at the Innovation Festival run by Northumbria Water Group, and there was a great keynote by the author of Citizens, John Alexander, and he phrased it amazingly well. So people have gone from being subjects and basically being told what to do and where to buy from, evolving into consumers where we're actively having a choice on where we can buy from, to becoming citizens and helping to shape the future of the organizations they deal with. And they prefer companies with purpose. So I think the role of citizens in actively engaging, the transitioning is going to be fundamental to this, right? So that's a really important
absolutely
part.
Look, I think we did a study a couple of years ago and looked at how people respond to different policies. And what you see is if you provide valuable information to people, they volunteer, a group of them, obviously not everybody, but if, you know, the sort of first movers and shakers, they are the ones who actually take on some actions that are different from status quo. They have the means, they have the capacity and the interest. So they start doing things, they start installing, for example, becoming more water aware, or replacing, I'm just giving you examples, replacing their lawns or fixing their fixtures or changing their habits. And then gradually, and that group is actually quite key when you're talking about a sector's transition, right? Because they've sort of created a new norm, new model that everybody sort of follows then. And in a way, it also reduces the sort of the cost of business sometimes in some ways. I mean, obviously you need to have enough people to create a market for new ideas. But in a way, they sort of gradually start doing that. And I give you a great example on that. So for example, I know you're going to have Aaron from Cleantech, Epic Cleantech at your, you're having him already in the show. And I think his business is a very interesting model because it sort of partially followed. I mean, I'm sure the idea was there and he was working on it, but in many ways, when San Francisco passed an ordinance for sort of enabling on-site reuse systems and asking for new buildings to have on-site reuse systems in place when they're larger than 200,000 square foot or higher, and now it's about 100,000 square foot, the new law. You know, that created a platform for Aaron's ideas and work to have an outlet, right? So it was just like, idea was there, the incentives was provided, the landscapes transitioned, and start happening, right? So you need a few different things to move for these ideas to take on and get somewhere. And I think with water, we are a little bit behind, and people, water has been one of these sort of like comes out of your tap, out of sight, out of mind. You don't necessarily think where it comes from, where it goes. So people sort of, and it's actually, despite all the discussions that we are having about becoming very, it's one of the utilities that the cost of service is increasing and the bills are increasing, still one of the cheapest utility bills that people pay. So incentives are not there, right? People are not thinking about it as much.
Hey, Newsha, a couple of things. You brought up, well, I think we actually brought up Aaron, and you're running with it and providing a lot more insight. He had a really different approach in that it wasn't this tension between the public sector and regulations and innovative technologies. His background shaped how he influenced and engaged the public sector in a way that was very positive. I mean, despite some of the pushback, but for me, it was an eye opener, because I always sort of frame this as black and white. Oh, public sector is never going to change. You've got to have entrepreneurs. And he said, well, yes to both, and then took a path down the middle, which I thought was really interesting, which leads me to a question. Are you seeing centralized utilities embrace decentralized technologies because they know that if they're going to be more sustainable and resilient, they need to start thinking about maybe how do they increase their customer area in different ways besides just laying out pipes? I mean, does that make sense? Are you seeing anything like that at all?
I think that's a very good point. I would say, when we started this conversation, I said we need to think about decentralized solutions as a demand management strategy. And partially, this can be in some utilities' mind, but ultimately, that's not the way they're approaching it. I think when I give you an example, when San Francisco took on that ordinance in 2012, it was partially driven by the fact that building a centralized recycling plant in downtown San Francisco was not an easy task, right? The land is scarce. It's not as easy. You need a very large footprint to build a centralized recycling plant, right? And I think now I'm on the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, but at the time I wasn't. So I'm just like sharing this information based on what I have learned over the years. And they did a back of envelope calculation, and they figured, there's enough development happening in downtown San Francisco. The cost of building that infrastructure is quite high if you want to do a centralized, and it's very difficult. So this option is available. They had a few very innovative people within their team who were interested to embrace something like this, and that moved forward. So it's like you had the right people, you had the right incentives, in a sense, not financial incentives, but the fact that it wasn't easy to create supply guarantees for this area. There was an opportunity to rethink the way they were doing things, and they took it, right? And they also remember in San Francisco, one other thing, which is important, is it's a city and a county, right? So the permitting process is less complicated. That's how this whole process started and sort of spearheaded in that sense. But now, when you're talking about other people who are interested to embrace this, often they complain about the permitting process and how complicated that is, how many layers they have to go through, right? It's not easy. It's not really clear who is the one who's going to permit these kind of solutions. It's not something you can just do it, right? And then also utilities. One other thing I want to bring into this, which I think makes it a little complicated, but it's important to remember, is it takes 10, 15 years to go from an idea to planning, to design, to planning, to building an infrastructure solution, especially centralized ones, right? And let's just step back and say, right now we are in 2023, right? If City X was going to build a pipeline to bring water from a location to location, or build a centralized recycling plant, or anything else, they started planning this long time ago, right? Probably 2005, 6, 7, they were started in, that idea, and it was put on the books, the money was allocated, the process was started, a consulting firm and construction firm was hired. It's a long process. And just keeping that timeline in mind, think about how many different droughts we have gone through since then, right? The severe droughts we have experienced, deluge and the droughts that we have experienced back to back in different ways, right? I bet the 2006 plan wasn't accounting for all these things, right? And then
who would have predicted in 2006 we would have had a pandemic to go through as well, right?
Who would have predicted
all of
this?
these complete historic anomalies which just pop up and throw all the numbers out the window a little bit.
And it's not easy to go back and rethink that. That's another big problem, right? If I'm right now in 2023 and I'm in the last sort of, I just need to sign this and move it forward, I'm not going to start that 15-year process again. So think about these as like huge moving ships that they're not nimble.
Right.
They're not agile as using the big tech's sort of buzzwords.
A lot of the sorry, Will, go on.
No, you almost sounded like a management consultant for a minute when you used the word agile. Newsha, you scared me for a second there.
I was trying to use the buzzwords.
No, you did great. You scared me though.
If
Sorry,
they give me
Tom.
a big, long title, maybe I'll move there.
Oh, I know people. So
the agile master of all the infrastructures in the world.
But do you think, like, looking at those relatively long life cycles of sort of infrastructure and adding to the supply, really makes the decision to try and drive down the demand there's a huge incentive to do that, which can show impact almost within months if you can get the communication and the campaign right. Yes. We do a utility leadership series where we interview the CEOs from around the world, from Jamaica to Denmark to Netherlands, and I think the one commonality amongst all of them is that the way to be able to provide an increased amount of water for a growing population impacted by climate change is by reducing the amount people consume. And Denmark has done it phenomenally well from the utilities I've spoken to by pricing water. It's more expensive, but they priced it accordingly back in the day. And even the leading utility in the Netherlands are looking at, so how can we get people to use 20-30 liters less per day? When you multiply that by 5.86 million people, suddenly that's a lot of infrastructure that doesn't need the 10-15 years, right? So
yes. And I think one other thing I would say is it's not just price. It's public awareness, because with price, you can catch some of the people, right? And a handful of people would fall in that category that because you're increasing the price, they would respond. But then the rest of them, it's all about public awareness, understanding what needs to be done. Why does this matter? You need to be able to protect the ecosystem. You need to be able to have enough water in the rivers. You need to be able to protect the quality of water, because every drop that we use, somebody has to treat it and put it back in the environment, right? You need to be able to allow people to use the water before it's used and consumed multiple times, right? So that public awareness can go a long way. And I think you brought this up, Tom, at the beginning, which is there was this disconnect between utility and people. There were water utilities that built the infrastructure, brought the water to us, we used it, done. And the only job people and consumers have was to pay their bill. They never ask question where my water is coming from. Where is it going? Sometimes they know where it comes from. They have no idea where it goes. What it takes for water to come to my home. What am I paying for? Many people don't know what they're paying for, right? What's the process? That whole sort of black box sort of disabled utilities to engage with their customers more actively and effectively. And I think that is key when it comes to sort of changing behavior, transitioning to a new model, changing their financial incentives, changing their business model, which we are constantly talking about, which is that is the first step, but something needs to happen for that first step to sort of keep hold.
I heard this analogy once that was pretty crude, but I think it's maybe apt for the stream. Is it ironic that some people have a more positive relationship and more insight into where their pizza is being made with a local Domino's, for example? Again, we'll probably bleep that out because we don't promote one particular pizza brand over another.
Tom, what are you doing here?
No, just let me finish here, Will. But if you think about it, people have a positive relationship with where they're ordering their pizza, and on the app they can see where it's made, where it's being delivered, get details on the ingredients, right? And is it more ironic that people have a more positive relationship with a pizzeria than they do with their local water company, right? Yeah. Did that work out, Newsha? I think that analogy worked out.
I think that analogy worked out.
I got there eventually, but...
And I would say people, like, if you think about, let's talk about pizza and delivery and all that, a lot of innovation has happened in that process. Now you see like robots going around different cities delivering pizza to people, right? One innovative technology right there, right? Or, different companies delivering food to you. But we don't see as much innovation happening in water just because people don't connect to it as much. There's no nest for water or there are some technologies out there, but they're not being picked up by the masses because there's that disconnect. We made that analogy work, Tom.
Newsha, we're on the same team. Hang on, go on. Will, I'm just waiting for Will to go on.
You wonder why, the interest in pizza, because it's pizza, Tom. It's pizza.
Yes.
Who doesn't love a slice or a pie? So how does water become like a pizza? I mean, I think that would be a great thought piece.
Yeah.
I think we found a heading, the title for the podcast anyway, on that question. But no, I agree. I mean, isn't that a shame where we live that people are more concerned that their pizza is 2 minutes late and they want to know a step-by-step process of where it is in the cooking cycle, how much it costs. They pay over the odds and then where it's delivered to where the water comes from that's keeping them alive, right? I mean, how can we that fundamentally change? I just sound like an old man having a bit of a rant, but it's a really good point, isn't it? Like people love pizza, but
yes, Tom. I've got a question. It's almost serious, and if it's serious, it won't last long. But Newsha, do you think that there is a movement for people that embrace decentralized technologies? Leaders out there that are interested in decentralized systems because they believe they can control the quality and quantity of their water more than an external party. I mean, are you seeing that as a factor in behavior change and the adoption of innovative technologies?
I would say yes, in some ways. So, for example, during the drought, I spoke to a number of individuals who were considering putting installing gray water systems in their homes, because they wanted to maintain their backyard. So they were willing to embrace that solution to keep their lifestyle going, right?
Right.
So the incentive was that, okay, we do understand there's a drought. We see that everybody's keep talking about, there's not enough water. Don't do this. Get rid of all your, water thirsty the landscape. But if I want to keep it, can I repurpose my laundry water? Those actually not even super high-tech technologies, just like put two pipes and bring a plumber to do two things. And then here you have it, right? So you see that people realize there is a shortage.
Mm-hmm.
They want to do something. They see an opportunity, they embrace it. I think on the more technical decentralized, which is somebody needs to come to my house, and we didn't talk about this, but one thing that bothers me the most in our household is the proximity between our showers and toilets and the fact that they're not connected, right?
Right.
We almost use the same amount of water for in our showers and our toilets. And a simple opportunity is to repurpose that water and reuse it, right? And there are technologies out there, but those are a little bit more invasive, right? You need to have somebody to come in, to install that system. The second thing, or the third thing here is, time of use very much matters in water. Very similar. I always think about, and I think I brought this up to you, Bill, before. I think about batteries and the sort of relevance of batteries for energy sector is very similar to storage to water sector. They're the same thing. Batteries are storage too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like somewhere to hold the electrons, somewhere to hold water molecules, right? And the challenge is water obviously takes more space. If you want to store it, you have to think about how much residence time it has, what needs to happen before you use it. But the analogy is the same. So the same way that the energy sector is sort of struggling with batteries and their size and where they hold things, in the water sector, we are sort of, when we think about this centralized system, we deal with the same thing, right? How long the shower water is going to sit in a basin or in a tank? How do I use it? Like, for example, people talk about, if I repurpose my shower water, what about if my dog drinks that water, or my, an infant goes and touches that water? But I think that's secondary in a sense that next technology is going to come and then shut down the top of your toilet, and then you need to use your fingertip to open it, or there are different things you can do to do that. That cannot be the first order of, I'm not going to do this because this is going to happen. That's secondary. Then the new technologies were coming to prevent that. Anyway, I think I sort of went through multiple things, not necessarily connected, but not necessarily exactly the same. But so I think thinking about those things are very much matters when we are thinking about transitioning, right? What happens to water? How do you treat it? Where do you store it? How invasive that is? All that very much matters.
There's been some interesting sort of innovations and rethinking plumbing, and there's elements in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Reinventing the Toilet Challenge to see what's just completely, as you mentioned, in rethinking how a modern day bathroom works. Something that you said that was really interesting, those citizens you mentioned that were putting in grey water recycling, am I right in saying the key driver was to sort of maintain that lifestyle, right? To have those luxury green lawns, as opposed to the other driver that's like, in terms of water scarcity and more the environmental side. Would you say that maintaining that level of living was the primary reason for sort of taking initiative to install their own grey water recycling systems?
In those cases that I spoke to, obviously, but you always need people to start a movement, right? Then when it normalizes, then you can use it for different ways.
And likely those people are going to be vocal in the communities and the neighborhoods and sort of
Yeah.
almost positively impact and influence their neighbors
Yes.
around them as well.
Absolutely. It's like, imagine I want to, fix my backyard. I might sit around and think about who should I hire? I need to go search. It's just a process. But if my neighbor hired someone, I'm going to take the name, call the guy, right? It's just that, it kind of creates this like very local movement around, oh, you already have the person who can do it. It's easy. I can quickly access it. So-and-so has done it. So they know it's doable and this person is trustworthy. So it basically, I'll do it, then my other neighbor does it, right? So it's kind of like create this neighborhood norms, which are super important when it comes to transitions.
I think people are more likely to sort of trust their neighbors and their local community in telling them this is the way forward than perhaps a local politician where, trust is just growing in the time we're moving in. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And one other thing I want to say here, we are right now talking about developed cities and retrofitting, right? But we're not talking about future per se. And I think there is another element into these decentralized systems, which is, every neighborhood, every new subdivision, every new city that's being built is just a blank sheet of paper that can go different direction compared to how we have done things, right? So how do you leapfrog? How do you enable these groups and communities and new developments to look different from how we built everything 200 years ago? I mean, we have been doing the same thing over and over and over again for 200 years almost, right? We have refined it, but on the edges, very marginal, not necessarily very revolutionary. Now we have the solutions and technologies. So it's kind of like, how do you retrofit the old systems, but how do you build new things differently? And that very much matters. That's an opportunity we are not sort of taking advantage of.
It's interesting you bring that up, in the conversations, some of the conversations I'm having, seeing builders actually invest in innovative technologies that reduce the demand side of the equation. Their venture arm is actually searching for technologies that reduce demand and give them that ability to, grow by building more homes. It's an interesting lever in all of this.
And it changes the way you connect to the old part of the system as well, right? I think if you can reuse and repurpose water multiple times in your home, right, you might take a very little amount of water from the existing system. So there might be a lot less resistance from the community to see a new subdivision, if that's the case, right? Because they're not thinking, oh, they need to build more infrastructure to enable these people. They're just taking on a new form. And also, I know we didn't touch on this, but I think it's important to remember, going back to the earlier conversation we had on how long it takes to build infrastructure and how a lot of these utilities are dependent on centralized linear systems, and they want to build big major infrastructure. Another side of this affordability, right? We want it or not, these decentralized, or we obviously want it, but if utilities want it or not, these decentralized solutions are going to keep hold at some point. A few more droughts, a few more, severe climate conditions that we may experience, and not just droughts, also flooding. People start getting more interested in like how decentralized systems can provide potential more resilience or security or water security for them. So they are going to, that first movers and shakers are going to start embracing these things. Now, a lot of utilities, remember, they started planning all these things 15 years ago. They're going to build it anyway, right? Now we have all these extra capacity that many people might not end up wanting or using.
Right.
And someone has to pay for all this.
Right.
It's not about making money. It's more about, in some cases, especially in the US, since a lot of utilities are publicly owned utilities, it's just about being able to operate and maintain system to the highest quality, right? Cost of service. And if people are plugging off or partially sort of going off the grid, the demand keep decreasing. Somebody has to pay for these things, and those people can end up being people from disadvantaged groups that don't have the means to build infrastructure, or invest in on-site reuse systems. Very similar to an energy sector. You see that the same thing playing out there right now at this moment. That's going to be the case in the next 10, 15, 20 years in the water sector. Like, who is going to pay for all the infrastructure we planned and designed and financed 20 years ago?
Right. Especially when, increasing the price of water is extremely controversial, right? Even though it's fundamentally
talk about affordability.
I mean, we're seeing that in the UK at the moment with the CSO issue, and actually the investment that needs to happen to change sort of a historic, very complicated way of managing wastewater and stormwater. But actually, there's been figures suggested of how much that will be added to the ratepayers' bills, which, again, has not been well received. So, but yeah, I think, as you mentioned, change is coming. And I think there's going to be those front runners who do embrace it and embrace these innovations, and will hopefully lead the way, not just within utilities, but from citizens as well. So, Newsha, thanks so much. As we expected, amazing to always catch up with you and hear your insight, particularly in sort of relation to the Colorado River Basin. I don't know about you guys, but it's the evening now in the UK. I'm pretty peckish, and for some reason, I quite fancy pizza. But
yes.
We should actually rethink the sponsorship model of the stream wheel. But anyway, I'll bring it back to a serious note. Thanks so much, Newsha. Always amazing to sort of hear how you see the sort of centralized, decentralized makeup for water security as well. So, Will, closing remarks from yourself, if you will.
Yeah, so something serious. You really got me thinking about first movers and how do we scale them. Essentially, a wedge to really move us to a better place. And yeah, you guys got me thinking about pizza a lot, and the connection between the two industry sectors. So I don't know. I think I just need to go eat now.
It's almost lunchtime in Colorado.
Oh, it's definitely lunchtime here, Newsha.
Yes.
So
I'll wait
right,
for a couple hours. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys. Fun and lots of great discussions.
Wonderful to see you. Thanks for the thoughts.
Thanks so much, Newsha. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.